It's more than just another radio show. It's a beacon of truth. Fasten your seatbelt and find out why they call Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers the Dynamic Deacon. Join Deacon Harold for a fast-paced hour that sheds encouraging light on today's culture. Welcome to Beacon of Truth with your host, Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers.
Indeed, welcome to Beacon of Truth with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. I'm Ace McKay, glad to bring you some of his live dynamic moments when he's on the road, because that's where he is today. He's currently traveling and speaking out over the weekend. So when he does that, we bring you some of those amazing events so that you don't miss out on some of these great morsels that help us to see God's word more clearly or to understand our response to what's happening in the world. So as we kick things off today, we're taking you to Benedictine College, where he is building a civilization of love through a series and a Catholic response to racism, something that we can definitely lean into his wisdoms as we head into today's episode of Deacon Harold's Beacon of Truth.
In the book of Numbers, chapter 12, right at the beginning of the book of Numbers, the story is told of Miriam and Aaron speaking out against Moses. It says Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married. So the Cushite, this Ethiopian, so she was an Ethiopian woman. In other words, she was a black African woman that Moses married. And Miriam and Aaron were upset because Moses married a black woman. And the anger of, verse 9, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And when the cloud removed from over the tent, so remember when Moses was in the presence of the Lord in the tent of meeting, the Shekinah, glory of God, the glory cloud came over the tent. And when Moses came out, the cloud went away. So he's coming out of the tent, the cloud goes away. And behold, Miriam was leprous, as white as snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, "O my Lord, do not punish us, because we have done foolishly and have sinned." So we see this idea of racism, that my race is superior to your race, is a sin in the Bible. And God says, okay, you want to be white? I'll show you white. Bam, and he made her leprous as a punishment. Now, Martin Luther King, in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, said this: "Sooner or later, all the people of the world will have to discover a way to live together in peace, and thereby transform this pending cosmic elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood." He went on to say that if peace and racial equality is to be achieved, man must evolve for all human conflict a method that rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Dr. King is speaking of a love rooted in faith, a faith that acknowledges what John says in his first letter: God is love. And he who lives in love lives in God, and God lives in him. So racial injustice and prejudice are antithetical to love, to truth, to freedom, and to peace. Now, in order to adequately address the issue of race, we have to define our terms. So we have to differentiate prejudice from racism, two different things. So prejudice with regard to race is a preconceived notion about someone that is not based on facts or even objective experience, and often leads to stereotyping. Racism is prejudice with the added dimension that my race is superior to your race. So you're basing your belief system, that your prejudices and your biases, on the fact specifically that your race is superior to another person's race. So let me give you an example. Now, as you heard, I went to Notre Dame. I'm the first person in my family ever to go to college. I had an academic scholarship to Notre Dame. But because of my size, like what happened back in January before COVID, I was speaking at a parish, and a guy came up to me, "Oh, you went to Notre Dame. What position did you play?" Now, that wasn't a racist statement, but it was sure prejudice, because that was an observation not based on any facts or objective experience. He just saw a big black guy, Notre Dame equals football. What he should have asked me was, what did I study? That's what he should have asked me. So that statement wasn't necessarily a racist statement, but it was definitely prejudiced. Now, a racist would be like, Ku Klux Klan and, groups like that my race is superior to your race, and we're basing our ideology and the way we deal with you based on that fact. Now, all of us, to some extent, harbor some level of prejudice, even if it's not racial prejudice. So, for example, I traveled to the South. Well, before COVID, I used to travel to the South quite often. And the first time I started going to the South, I'm like, oh, gosh, you guys must like shrimp and grits. Because, of course, everybody from the South likes shrimp and grits. That's a prejudice statement. It's not a racist statement, but that's just an assumption I made because they live in the South. The problem is when it comes to race, we consume images and sound bites from television, movies, social media that inundate us with caricatures of various races that are often derisive and belittling, and even if only subliminally, plant seeds of half-truths in the minds and the hearts of viewers and listeners. Now, why do I say that? Because racism is learned. When you have little kids, like when my kids were little, and they're playing with other kids, it doesn't matter the kid's black, white, Native American, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. They're all playing because they're just kids. They don't care. It's later when they start learning this way, they start seeing what their parents are doing, jokes that are made. They start seeing these images over and over and over on television. Let me be clear. For example, when you look at a movie like Glory, or when I was a kid, Roots, or movies that depict slavery, what they're depicting is an actual historical period of time where this thing happened. But when you see images over and over again of black people as slaves, or black people as thieves, or black people as drug dealers, or black people without any other images to reinforce that, even subliminally in your mind, that starts to work into your psyche. For example, when I was a kid, they had Western movies, right? So the hero, the hero cowboy wore the white hat, the bad guy wore the black hat. If you're on a safe list, like internet, if you're whitelisted, that means it's safe. If you're doing something wrong, then you're blacklisted. You see what I'm saying? I'm not saying, oh, that's the, but when you start to combine those things start to build over and over again, those things subliminally start to work into your psyche. Prejudice and racist attitudes of individuals also infiltrate institutional structures and organizations, and that forms the foundation for systemic racism. So, for example, what I mean by systemic racism? The institution of slavery, apartheid in South Africa, the Dred Scott versus John F. Sanford decision of the Supreme Court that said that black people were property and not human beings, Jim Crow laws after slavery. Those are institutional racist kinds of ideologies. Now, even in the history of the Catholic Church, there have been leaders and organizations that chose to follow the civil law rather than the law of God by owning slaves, implementing segregation in churches, excluding minorities from participation in the life of the church. And these effects are still felt in the church today. Now, that said, we have to be careful with the term institutional racism. In order to claim factually that an institution is racist, you have to show that the institution actively promotes racism through official or unofficial policies, procedures, directives that enshrine the belief that one race is superior to another. Now, institutional racism has to be distinguished from individuals within institutions that continue to hold prejudice or racist attitudes. You see what I'm saying? You have to distinguish institutional racism, organization structures, from the people in the organization who are racist. Let me give you an example. The church herself, founded by Jesus Christ, is not racist because it's the bride of Christ. The church is perfect. But there are individuals in the church, both clergy and laity, who are racist. Likewise, law enforcement agents. I was in law enforcement for 23 years, 11 years as a police chief. And so agencies in and of themselves are not racist. But we have to recognize the fact that we are all sinners in need of God's mercy, and that we are still dealing with the effects of original sin.
Well, building a civilization of love, Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers on the road today. So as we continue to bring you this very special, dynamic moment of some of his amazing live events, we want to do that for you each and every time that he is traveling, so that when he comes to your area, you don't miss out on what's happening, and might even motivate you to bring some friends with you as well. So we'll continue in our series on love and the Catholic's response to racism, coming up on Beacon of Truth with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers.
Welcome back to Beacon of Truth with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers.
It is a very special edition of Beacon of Truth with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, as he is live on the road. So when he is gone, we'd like to bring you some of those live events so that you definitely don't miss out on what he has to say about what's happening in our world and how we can filter our Catholic faith through that. Before we get back into our response to racism, I want to remind you to make sure you download the EWTN app so you can not only take live TV, radio streams, and also on demand. You can find out more about what's coming up schedule-wise, submit prayer requests, and even have devotions together when you download in your app store, or just simply go to EWTNapps.com. We continue a very dynamic day with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers in his Building a Civilization of Love.
Now, if we're honest, we have to acknowledge that the Church of the United States has often been slow to respond to issues of race. In 1979, they put out a document called Brothers and Sisters to Us, where they talked in depth about the issues of race. That was followed in 1984 by a wonderful document put out by the black bishops of that time, What We Have Seen and Heard. Beautiful document. Then 2015, Archbishop Kurtz of Louisville put out a wonderful statement on race, and Bishop Edward Braxton of Belleville, Illinois, he's been outspoken for years on issues of race. And here's something that he said I think is just powerful. We do not experience our faith in Jesus Christ and his command to love at the deepest level of our being. So he thinks one of the issues with regard to race is that we're not experiencing our faith in Jesus Christ and his command to love at the very deepest level of who we are. I thought that was powerful. And most recently, in 2018, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops put out a document called Open Wide Your Hearts, The Enduring Call to Love. Wonderful document on racism. Now, like all of you, I am sickened by the events of the past weeks, months, and years. The solution to what we are seeing and experiencing in this country is not rioting or looting or vandalism. Racism is learned behavior, and Catholics can play a significant role in breaking down the walls of racism by taking a hands-on approach to creating pillars of mutual respect and understanding, built on the firm foundation of covenant relationship. So what specifically can we do? One, we need to see past stereotypes and see people. We need to see past stereotypes and see people. I was telling Ty and the guys at Malcolm, the guys at lunch today, about experience I had in Chicago. I was speaking at a huge conference, 5,000 people. I was dressed just like I am now, suit, shirt, tie, crucifix, deacon pin. I was walking into an elevator at a hotel in Chicago, and as I walked into the elevator, the only other person was a little white lady in there. So I walked in the elevator, I smiled and nodded my head at her, and her eyes got really big. She backed up to the back of the elevator and grabbed her purse, pulled it close to her. And I'm like, oh, she's scared. So I didn't say anything. I turned around, I pushed my floor, I stood right in front of the doors of the elevator, didn't say anything to her. The doors open up, I walk out to go to my room. Now, why was she afraid of me? Now, granted, She may have had something happen to her traumatic that was in the past. I get it. I didn't do it. Why is she afraid of me? You know, why is it I still walk down the street and sometimes people cross the street? They're afraid. I mean, they see me. You look intimidating. I'm a teddy bear, man. I'm a big old squeezable teddy bear. But when people see me, they say, oh, big black guy, and they get scared. You know, let me tell you something, my friends. That hurts. That happens to you enough, that hurts. So we need to start seeing, and here's how we do it. Very first page of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1 says, we're made in the image and likeness of God. Every single human being made in God's image and likeness. What does that mean? We hear that all the time. Let's stop and think about what that means for a second. The word image is salem in Hebrew, a masculine noun. It literally means a shadow that is the outline or representation of the original. A shadow that's the outline or representation of the original. So I'm standing under the lights and I'm casting a shadow. Is the shadow me? No, it's the image. It's the outline. It's the representation of me. But yet if I move my arm, the shadow moves the arm. If I move my leg, the shadow moves the leg. What does that mean spiritually? Are we God? Oh, come on. Even with the mask on, you should be saying, no, we're not God. But yet, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 says we are partakers in the divine nature. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9 says our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit that we have within us from God. Genesis 2, verse 7 says that God breathed into the nostrils the breath of life. Nishmak ruach ka'im in Hebrew. Beautiful phrasing for God taking the breath of his life and pouring his divine life into us. We're not God, but we have God's image, God's outline, God's shadow imprinted onto our souls. That was the plan from the beginning. So what does that mean? Like when you move your arm, the shadow moves. The idea before the fall was we mirror God. When we speak, God speaks. When we think, God thinks. When we love, God loves. We're supposed to be mirroring and reflecting the image of God for others. That was the idea. What about the likeness of God, a feminine noun, demuth in Hebrew, which means similar? Well, what does that mean spiritually? I had a wonderful time here at Benedictine. My first time to this university, or to this college, university. Beautiful place. Love the grotto. Everything. You guys are amazing. Had a meeting with President Minnis today, and it's wonderful. Now, what I hope you don't do is build a Deacon Harold statue. Don't do that, okay? But say you built the statue. Now, you put the statue on one side of me, and you put my son Benjamin, you put Ben on the other side of me. Now, you would say the statue and my son are both in my likeness because they both look like me. In fact, the statue looks more like me than my son. But, unlike the statue, what does my son possess? What do we have possessed in common? An ousia, right? In Greek, a spirit, a nature, a being, right? So even though the statue looks more like me, my son is much more in my likeness. That's the idea of being made in the image and likeness of God. And that's how we need to start seeing each other. You know who did this so beautifully? Mother Teresa, St. Teresa of Calcutta. You know, I was watching a special. I rarely watch television. But when she was about to be canonized, I wanted to see what the secular media says about her. So I was watching a BBC program, and it had this documentary from like the 90s. And this reporter was following Mother Teresa around for half a day. And I was watching her and her nuns literally in the sewers of Calcutta, picking up the lame, picking up those with leprosy, limbs falling off, people dying of AIDS and pleurisy and all these other nasty diseases. And they were bringing them back to the hospice, and they were taking care of them and praying with them because these people are going to die. Mother Teresa and her nuns weren't nurses. But they were there to show the poorest of the poor the love of God. That's what I saw. The reporter, You can see, as the time went on, you can see his face start to change. The smell, the stench, the way people looked. But he finally got to the point where he said to Mother Teresa, how could you stand to be around people that look like this? And little Mother Teresa looked at him and said, is that what they look like? Because when she saw someone, she saw Jesus. And the first place we need to start is to see Jesus in the person standing in front of you. That's what I want someone to look at when they see me. I don't want them to be scared. I want them to see Jesus. And that has to start with each and every one of us making a commitment to do just that. That's where we have to start. We should stop supporting media outlets, individuals, and organizations that create and encourage and perpetuate racist stereotypes and propose violence and anarchy as solutions. Next, we have to appreciate the gift of cultural diversity. We have to host and attend cultural, like for example, in the parish. Some very simple things we can do at the parish level. The documents that I talked about before that the bishops had written over the years, what about taking those documents, especially the last one that just came out a couple years ago, and doing a study group in a parish? Taking a document. Well, we don't have any black people or Hispanic people or Native American people in our parish. How about the neighboring parish? Here's something you can do. Have a potluck. People love being around food. So have a potluck. People can bring. Let me tell you the story of my parish, Immaculate Heart of Mary. Small inner city parish in Portland. Okay, our parish is half African, like dozen countries in Africa African. The other half are Filipinos and a mix of other people. Very rich, culturally diverse parish. But when I first got there, when we moved to Oregon, they were like separate in silos. The Vietnamese were separate from this group, the Africans were separate. I'm like, what's going on here? So Father Nicholas decided to make a change, to bring people together. So one of the things he did, we had a potluck. So the Vietnamese brought their food, the Africans brought their food, the Filipinos brought their food, and Europeans brought their food. This massive potluck, and people just started getting up and telling their stories. Let me tell you what it's like to be black and Catholic in Portland. Let me tell you what it's like when my parents came over from Vietnam and what it was like to struggle for acceptance. Let me tell you what it's like coming from Mexico. We just started listening to each other's stories. And people, you know what people found most amazing? How much we had in common. How much we had in common. And what did that start to do? We started having potluck after potluck. And then Father stopped organizing it because the people wanted to organize it themselves. Then we started having cross-culture in the Mass. For example, the Vietnamese choir would come and sing to the English Mass. Man, to this day, I don't understand a word they're saying, but man, the singing is powerful. I love the Vietnamese choir. Every time they're there, I'm like, yes! It's beautiful, meaningful, powerful singing. Beautiful. Don't understand a word. But they're speaking the beauty of their culture. We need to share experiences like that.
Live from Benedictine College as we continue with a very dynamic day of Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers on today's Beacon of Truth. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, he is continuing to help us to dissect how we can truly have a response to racism into the world, sharing and loving better this year. So more with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers on Beacon of Truth coming up next.
Welcome back to Beacon of Truth with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers.
It is a very special edition of Beacon of Truth today as Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers on the road and live today as we are giving you morsels from his series on building a civilization of love, as he had a chance to talk to college students about what a Catholic's response can be to racism. We'll continue that conversation here in just a bit, but first, remember, EWTN Mass Guide Booklet is an e-booklet available for you as the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass and Our Lady of the Angels Chapel live every morning, 8 Eastern. And if you want to find out more about how to be a part of that service, make sure you get the free Mass booklet or ebook when you visit EWTN.com/Catholicism, and then make sure you click on readings to get your Mass guide. We're going to continue with a very special dynamic version of today's Beacon of Truth as Dynamic Deacon is continuing in his series on building a civilization of love.
Now here on campus, you got the black student union. I'm not sure if you have other types of unions with students of different racial backgrounds. But don't just say that, well, those are just for the black kids, or those are just for the Hispanic kids, those are for the Native American kids. They're for everybody. Let me tell you, when I got, well, I was a freshman at Notre Dame, my roommate, now I lived in a triple, and I had 2 roommates. Now back then, in the 80s, no internet, no cell phones. All right, so we got a list. These are your roommates. I've never seen them. You can't Google them. There's no Google. So I had to wait till I got there to see who these people were. So I got there first. I'm sitting on the bed. I didn't want to, plant my stuff and make myself at home until all 3 of us got a chance to talk about how we're going to divide the room up. So I'm waiting. The next guy comes in. Which one are you? There was Brendan, me, and Ed. He goes, which one are you? I said, I'm Harold. He said, first words to me, you're black. Oh, Captain Obvious, this is going to be a long year. And I was like, oh, this going to get worse. So then, because I was waiting, I had my guitar out. And I was playing Panama by Van Halen. So then he goes, after he says, you're black, he goes, you like Van Halen? Black people like Van Halen? I'm like, oh, Lord have mercy, it's going to get worse. Just, oh, Lord, no, please. But you know what? Ed had only known one black person his entire life. His entire life till that point. Now he has to live with me. And so I said, well, this either be the worst year I've ever had or the best year. I decided to be the best year. So you know what we did? And I'm going to stereotype here. Now, Ed was used to going to parties where they go off campus, or you go to a bar, you go to somebody, they drink, and they pass out and throw up. That's not my idea of a good time. Now, the Black Cultural Arts Center at Notre Dame, that's where I went to the party. Because when they went there, no drinking, no drugs, no that. You just go there, you put on the music, you just dance and have an amazing time. I invited Ed to come with me. He goes, I can't dance. I said, don't matter, bro, just come. So he came with me, only white dude there. Man, he started doing that. People were, blah, blah, blah. He was like, at first it was uncomfortable, but then the girls grabbed him, brought him out on the floor, and they're like, whoa, and it's like, whoa, what's going on? Oh my, it was hilarious. And I'm not kidding you. He talked about that experience for the next week. He loved it. And you know what? Ed and I we decided to room together the next year, and we were both in each other's weddings. And we're still close friends to this day. Because through dialogue, through understanding, we broke down those barriers, and Ed started to see not a black guy, but he started to see Harold. And we had an amazing experience and friendship built on that fact. So he appreciated the gift of culture. For example, if you go to a church, like if you go to a church that has, you have no people of color at all. How about putting some saints up? Like say, I go to Elizabeth Ann Seton. Okay, how about putting a statue of Martin de Porres up there? How about putting St. Teteric Titakwitha up there? How about putting some St. Peter Claver, some other, people don't know who's that? So you start to see that there are saints in the church that look like us. See, those little subtle things are start to tear down the walls and build bridges of understanding. This is what I love. Make a serious effort to promote conversation and dialogue, because that's not happening now. I've said this already a couple times today. The reason why we're seeing the looting and the violence and the rioting, because there's no leadership. Back in the 60s, it was Martin Luther King. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela. Today, nobody. Because there's no one we can rally around and say, here's someone who cuts through all the rhetoric. Here's someone we can stand behind. Here's someone who's speaking truth. Here's someone we can support. Here's someone who's actually trying to bring people together. There's nobody. So in the midst of a leadership void, a leadership vacuum, we're seeing violence and looting and rioting. Back in 2016, after an incident of violence in Los Angeles, Snoop Dogg and a rapper called The Game decided to meet with the mayor and the police chief of Los Angeles. The purpose was to facilitate effective change through dialogue and understanding. And I thought, wow. Because remember, Snoop, one of them Crips, one of them was Blood. They said, let's put that aside. We have to sit down and let's work this thing out. They need to see us as human beings, not gang colors. They need to start saying, we need to start understanding and building. And so they did that. I think efforts like that need to be applauded and multiplied, where communication barriers are shattered and respectful dialogue is opened between those in power and those who are disenfranchised. Now, I tell you, when's the last time you heard of an incident in Los Angeles since 2016? See what I'm saying? What? What happened? In Los Angeles? Okay, and obviously you're upset. We're all upset about that, right? Yeah. So between 2016 out, so we had another incident there. But that building the respectful dialogue, I think, is critically important. Deep-seated commitments to building integrity, sharing wisdom, imparting knowledge can lead to a reciprocity of love and change. Reaching out with compassion to those of different races and hearing their stories, responding with empathy, working through differences with humble and contrite hearts can truly create a harmonic of love that will reverberate in the hearts and through our land. I honestly believe that law enforcement practices and use of force practices need to be reevaluated. Now, during my 23-year career in public safety, I served on various leadership positions in organizations like the Western Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, the Protection Specialist Association, and many, many others. And from 2002 to 2008, I had the honor and privilege of serving on the board of the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training for the state of Oregon. That is a governor-appointed position over the agency that oversees training and resources for public safety officers to maintain the highest level of skill and to facilitate excellent service for Oregon's community and citizens. So I am very intimately familiar with how law enforcement officers are trained, and I will be the first to admit that given the frequent incidents of police brutality over the last several years, there needs to be reform. There's no doubt about that. This sentiment is shared by many other frontline officers, including members of the Minneapolis Police Department who condemn the actions of Officer Chauvin and the death of George Floyd, and they stand ready to listen and embrace the calls for change, reform, and rebuilding. That absolutely needs to happen. Reform and rebuilding, yes. Defunding, no. The idea of defunding police departments is a far-reaching overreaction, is short-sighted, and ultimately irresponsible. In this regard, I totally agree with Officer Brandon Tatum, who said that there are dangerous, evil people in the world. And when that person comes to your front door and endangers your family, who are you going to call? Politicians? Activists? No. You're going to call a man or a woman who took an oath to uphold the law and give their life, if necessary, to protect you and your family. The police officer is not going to turn away from you because of your race, your religion, or your past mistakes. So what exactly are you going to defund? Human trafficking? Homicide investigations? Identity theft? Elder abuse? Drug and gang intervention? Policing is a vocation and a calling from God. Jesus himself says, greater love than no man has to lay down his life for his friends. Most police are excellent and work hard every day to serve and protect and to give their lives as necessary for the people under their care. Now, if there were serial arsons going around and they found the arsonists and the arsonists were firemen, would people say, let's defund the fire department because of these arsonists are firemen? No one's calling for defunding of physicians who are supposed to care and save the lives of their patients because some doctors perform abortions or euthanize their patients. No one's calling for defunding of doctors. Police are not trained to kneel on people's necks or to shoot people in the back. We are not trained that way. No one is more angry about what's been going on than good cops. And just like good priests who are angry about those few priests who abuse children. So what can be done? I would say, first of all, go on a ride along. You know, these people who are calling for these changes have no idea what they're talking about, what the day-to-day officer goes through. Go on a ride along. You sign a waiver, you don't have to pay anything, and you sit in that patrol car and you go on actual calls that the police officer is going on. And you get to see what they do every single day. If you have a chance to go to a citizens academy, I would encourage you to do that. Where they put citizens, for example, traffic stops. You know, you walk up to the window, so you go, the police officer tells you what to do, you walk up to the car, the guy gets out of his car and starts walking towards you. You're giving commands to stop. He's not listening. He reaches into his pocket. Take your hands out of your pocket. Stop. Stop. The guy's still walking toward you with his hand in his pocket. What do? When you put a citizen in that situation, they're praying for, do I taser? Do I my gun? What do I? See, now it's different. It's different. I think they need to implement better psychological testing and screening to identify bias and prejudice. We're not doing a good job of that right now. Screening for those kind of things. When you do a traffic stop, you shouldn't treat that traffic stop differently because the person is white than if they were black or Hispanic. All of them should be done exactly the same way. But that's not let's be real, that's not what's happening. I mean, I've been profiled. I was driving my wife one day. My wife is Irish and German. We were driving the car, get pulled over. It wasn't speeding, it was a driving while black thing. Now, I'm a chief now, right? So, get pulled over. My wife is pissed. She's like, when he comes, I said, honey, don't do anything. So I have my hands, on the wheel and roll down the wheel. Yes, officer. Driver's license registration. Absolutely, officer. Here you go. And my wife is just waiting to say something and get mad. I said, no, honey, let the officer do his job. He went back. He ran it through leads. And, of course, he came back and said, sorry, have a nice day. When he saw in the system who I was. Yeah, that was nice. But what about the kid from the neighborhood who that happens to almost every day for doing nothing except driving his car? And he gets pulled over because he is suspicious or he's in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time. That's garbage. Again, we are not trained that way, but because we're not doing enough to train or to identify biases and prejudices within officers, they're bringing that with them into the job, but we're not trained that way. Guarantee you that. I think we need to implement more effective scenario-based training. All right, so one of the things they do is they train officers, they put them in difficult scenarios and figure out how they're going to handle this. Again, every officer goes through the same thing, but what happens is your biases start to play into how you handle this particular situation based on a person's race, and that should not be happening at all. Have police departments follow the recommendations of the Police Executive Research Forum to assist officers in recognizing the inherent, this is their words, the inherent dignity of every human person. Bam. You see past stereotypes and you see people. This is why I think community policing would be an important addition to this thing. Have officers in neighborhoods. Get to know the people that live there. Visit with them. Check in on them. Hey, how's your son doing today? Check in with the store owner. How's everything going today? You all right? Everything going good? Is there anything I can help you with? Anything you're seeing? Anything we need to be aware of? And we've gotten away from that model. We need to get back where officers are actually caring about the people that live, that's invested in those communities that they're helping to keep safe. So they can, again, start to see people and not just objects. Ongoing mandatory cultural diversity training for all officers. We're not doing that right now. Well, some agencies are, but not across the board. I think that's extremely important. Working with police unions to toughen accountability regarding moral turpitude and officer discipline investigations. Let me just explain what that's about. When I was on the Department of Public Safety and Standards training, one of the things that we do, when the officer takes an action, the board will look at that action, evaluate it to see if we need to pull the officer's license, all right, from operating as a police officer for the state of Oregon. And so we got this case once where an officer pulled over a woman for speeding, and when he went to the window, he saw that she was attractive, and so he made a very inappropriate remark to her. She got mad. She filed a complaint. The officer got suspended, and the issue came to us to investigate for a moral turpitude violation. Now, when his agency suspended him, they didn't follow the union regulations exactly for how that suspension was supposed to happen. So the union wanted to put the guy back on the street. And we're like, oh, wait a minute. We never investigated this woman's allegation. We didn't look. So you can't put that guy back on. He might do it to somebody else. Well, no, because the law, the specific regulation, union document wasn't followed. Whoa. And I said, this ain't happening. So I called an emergency session of the board, and I brought the union people and said, we ain't leaving this room till we get this fixed. And we eventually got a solution to that. But you can't have unions defending cops that are doing bad things. So we have to put different systems in place for that. The next thing, put God back in society. We have taken God completely out of the public discourse. We've stopped seeing each other made in the image and likeness of God as a culture, and instead we're trying to make God in our image and likeness, which is fulfilling one of Satan's lies. You will be like God. As faithful Catholics, we can no longer allow secular culture and ideology, with its promulgation of subjective relativistic truth, to displace the objective truth of the Catholic faith in doctrine and principles. In order to defeat racism, there must be further introspection and a deeper examination of conscience in order to arrive at the root cause of disunity and divisiveness within humanity that leads to sinful actions. We need to see ourselves and worldly principles as the autonomous center of truth. That's what's happening now. When we worship the Trinity of me, myself, and I, we lose the perspective of covenant relationship. Covenant relationship is about making a gift of myself to someone else. So it's not worshiping me, myself, and I. It's when you break yourself open to pour yourself out in love. It's when you give yourself away in love is when you truly find yourself in God. So we need to get back to those principles. We have to recognize and acknowledge the reality of sin, that it affects us and speaks to us within the depths of our being. We cannot allow the pain of sin and the suffering that it causes to take root in our hearts. We cannot allow sin to control us or its anguish to overwhelm us. Conquering sin in our lives begins with personal transformation, with an interior conversion that reveals the fundamental truth of being in existence, that God is love, and in himself, he lives a mystery of personal loving communion. Creating the human race in his own image and keeping it in being, God described in the humanity of man and woman the vocation and thus the capacity and responsibility for love and communion. We have to get back to an understanding of us and we, not I and me. We have to walk by faith, not by sight. You know, the cause for a wonderful priest, Venerable Father Augustus Tolton, is moving quite well through the Vatican right now. Father Tolton is the first black priest in the United States, born a slave in 1854 and died in 1897 in Chicago. He was only 43 years old when he died. Put up with tremendous racism. Despite the fact that from the time he was a small boy, he learned from his association with the right race to accept the fact that degradation and contempt were a common lot for God's black children. But Tolton never retaliated or sought revenge. Though he was upset, clearly, by the circumstances of his time, his heart was never filled with animosity or vitriol. Instead, Augustus Tolton responded with love and patience and understanding. Now, what's striking to me when I first learned about Father Tolton was why he remained in the Catholic Church despite a lifetime of racial animosity and prejudice. In the face of such bigotry and hatred, when he was even called nigger priest by the other priests who told the white parishioners that went to his parish, it doesn't count for your Sunday obligation if you go to the black church. Why did he leave? If anybody had a reason to leave the church, it was him. Nobody would have blamed him. But Father Tolton was able to discern what many fail to perceive and do not fully appreciate. That what the Catholic Church actually teaches is true and good and beautiful, despite the hypocrisy and contradiction of church members who do not actually live the faith that they profess. Father Tolton's always acknowledged the great gift of his Catholic faith and recognized that personal sin and human weakness are not greater or more powerful than the strength of objective truth found in Catholicism. He said the Catholic Church deplores a double slavery, that of the mind and that of the body. She endeavors to free us both. In this church, we don't have to fight for our rights because we are black. The church is broad and generous. She is the church for our people. Obviously, one of the things we also must do is pray. Obviously, we're all praying to the end of racism. We're all praying for that. But one of the things I think that we can do to really improve our prayer, to increase the power of prayer, is a couple things. First of all, praying in adoration. Praying in silence. Why is that important? We live in a culture that's filled with noise. And when God wants to speak to you, God doesn't speak to you here. God speaks to you where? Here. What's St. Benedict called the aurum cordis, the ear of the heart. That's where God can touch you. That's where God can change your life, is in your heart. But in order to hear that voice, you have to be quiet. But we are very uncomfortable in our culture with silence. Very uncomfortable. You have to have your iPod, your iPad, Twitter, this, that, the other. Some people can't even fall asleep without a radio on or some kind of distraction. I'm not saying those things are bad, but they're tools. They're not your life. They're tools. So put the tool down and find some time for quiet. Because in that quiet, you will listen to the voice of God and allow that voice to change your life. The other thing to enhance our prayer is fasting. Remember Jesus sent the 72 out. They came back and said, "Jesus, we get all kinds of cool stuff. But there were some demons we couldn't cast out. What happened?" Jesus said, yes, there are only some demons that can be cast out by prayer and fasting. So we have to unite fasting with our prayer. I'm not just fasting from food, which you could do, obviously, but maybe fasting from something that you enjoy. So if you have a favorite television show or something like that, you may want to stop watching that show for an entire season as your fast to unite with your prayer for a particular intention. Because fasting united with prayer is a powerful combination. I think, of course, asking the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary. John Paul II says in Mulieris Dignitatem, in God's eternal plan, it is woman in whom the order of love in the created world of persons first takes root. Through the Spirit, love becomes a gift for created persons. And the dignity of woman is measured in the order of love, which is essentially the order of justice and charity. I love that.
What an amazing message to really challenge us in our response to racism. Building a Civilization of Love series available as well on demand when you just search for Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. You can subscribe to his YouTube channel or just continue to listen and check out on demand at EWTN.com/radio when you check out Podcast Central. He is live and on location over the weekend, so we will be back in studio next time. And in the midst of that, also make sure you find this episode if you want to share it with your friends or your family, or even on social media. And we look forward to joining the conversation next time as we look to deepen our walk with God. Remember to let God be the one who defines who you are. I'm Ace McKay, and we'll see you next time on Beacon of Truth with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers.